This is just going to be a quick video showing how I fill up my composting bin for pre-composting materials for my wormery. So I'm using wood chip, which has a reasonable amount of leaves in there, so it's not just pure wood. It's already quite hot, so it's composted a little bit. There's lots of kind of microbes in there. You can kind of see it's been quite hot at one point, and it's gone a kind of silvery sort of bloom from bacteria and fungi in there as well. So to start off with, I use these, or well, any kind of bucket to measure materials out. So I'm just going to mix these up in a jug. I don't really do this, I usually layer and then aerate, but this is a different way of doing it. On a smaller scale, this is quite convenient. I use one of these compost soil scoops. This is the spent grain. It's fairly new, so fairly fresh, so it's probably quite warm already. I'll just leave that thermometer in there just to heat up. It's not desperately hot, it's only a couple of days old really. Picks up from the brewery. So I'm measuring an equal volume of the spent grain. This is quite wet, so I don't add any additional moisture. Don't add any water. Sometimes I use leachate from, well, not to get much leachate, but if you've got a wormery where it's rained and then that's the sump's kind of filling up, and if you open the tap and get any moisture out, you can use that to help to kind of dampen down wood chip and things like that. This is just sawdust from a woodwork shop. There's a mix of finer stuff from using a disc sander. The bulk of the material is softwood. There's no man-made timber, there's no man-made boards like plywood or MDF or anything like that. It's all stuff I've made myself, so I know what's gone into this. There is some hardwood in there as well, but that's shavings from a plainer thicknesser. So it's a little bit like pet bedding, the shaving side, but then there's finer sawdust in there as well. So you wouldn't use this as pet bedding because you might find that you get allergies and from the very, very fine sawdust. So I'm just adding another container full. That's with the sawdust in there. It's a little bit damp. It's a little bit dry rather. You can actually dampen that down to stop some of the dust. I'm doing this outside, so it's well ventilated, quite a distance away from it, so I'm not too concerned. I'm doing another container of the spent grain, and then I'm going to kind of pre-mix these before this to a compost bin. I'm doing it slightly differently because I've got a compost bin that's been heating up for around a couple of months, and I'm pre-composting material to use in a worm bin. So what I'm trying to do is get it through its initial hot phase, and then once it's cooled down, then I'll add that to the worm bin. I normally batch compost, but on this occasion I'm adding some material sort of halfway through the process. So that's 2 containers of spent grain, 1 container of wood shavings and sawdust, and 1 container of wood chip. I normally go for about 50-50, so 50% carbons, which is the wood chip, 50% spent grain, which is greens, which is the sort of source of nitrogen. On this occasion I'm doing, well, basically 50-50, but there's a little bit more greens in here from using the wood chip because there's plenty of leaves in there as well. So I'm just kind of roughly mixing this, and what you want to do is kind of, so it's homogeneous, so you can't see big clusters of spent grain. You don't really need to do this, you can actually just do it in layers. Alternatively, you can use one of these tools, which is a compost eraser, which has got 2 prongs, pushes down to the material, pulls up. There's not much to go down in here, it's fairly shallow, so the prongs aren't actually pulling back, but you normally just pop out like that and push it down to the material. But yeah, it's too shallow for it to be a good demonstration really. So on this occasion I'm just using a kind of soil cultivator with a 3-pronged hook kind of tools, just to give that a rough mix. You don't have to be very thorough with this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this to the existing compost pile. What I've noticed, as this has been a couple of months, the temperature's gone up to about 71, maybe 75 on a sort of peaks. And now the temperature's dropped down to about 68. But I've noticed a bit of an ammonia smell from it, so it needs a little bit more carbons and a little bit more aeration. So I thought what I'll do is I'll add this material in. It's all very fine stuff, so it won't take long to break down. I'll give that a couple of, maybe a month, and then depending on how hot the bin gets, then I'll kind of use that as the wormery food. Obviously this won't be as broken down as the remainder of the material, but with worm bins it's always good to have a mix of materials. So you've got the kind of more composted stuff, which will be the worms' bedding, and then the fresher stuff, which will be the worms' food. And if you've done vermicomposting before, composting with worms, you'll know that the bedding is also a source of food, and even the castings will be processed several times around by the worms. So depending on how long you leave a wormery set up, you can either get fairly kind of rough compost, or you can leave it until it's really, really fine castings, and then you can do as you wish with the castings. You can make worm teas, compost teas with those, or use it as a soil improver. So that's really pretty well mixed up. What I'll do is I'll stick my hand in there just to show you. Yeah, it's very wet, and it's, I almost say 50% moisture, so it shouldn't be dry and it shouldn't be wet, which is kind of a bit daft. But if it feels wet and slimy, then it's too wet. If it feels really dry, then obviously it's really dry. So I'm just going to take this, carry this over to the compost bin, and then dump this on top. So the compost bin looks very black. It's not completely composted by any means, it's still about 68 Celsius, so it's very, very warm. What I'm going to do is use this tool, compost aerator. You might see it working a little bit better this time. So it pushes down, then when it lifts up, those barbs pop out, and you take in material from lower down in the heap. So I'll just give this a quick aerate. So as it says, the temperature was 65 before I did this material. Aeration will tend to heat up a little bit more, and then you've got that fresh material as well, so the microbes will be able to feed on that. This is quite a workout, so I'll probably sound a bit out of breath when I'm doing all this. But there you go. It doesn't, you don't need to go crazy with it, it's just adding a little bit there. So when you push that down, you can see it really distributing that material. And if you did this for a little bit longer, you kind of wouldn't be able to see the fresh stuff where that's gone in. So I'm going to do the same with the remainder of the material. I'm going to keep a little bit of wood shavings still on the side, and then notice any smells from this. It just gives you an idea if it's too wet. If it's too wet, you need a little bit more carbon in there, a bit more browns, dry materials to help dry it out. And also aeration always really helps with composting. There you go. And oh yeah, it wasn't heated up yet. It's only 25, so that's, yeah, it hasn't been long enough for it to heat up yet. This will probably be about 50, but take a little bit longer to get back to temperature. Now it's had the top off and it's been aerated, so it's creeping up. It was about 65, it's 50, 55. Yeah, it's going up to about, not far off what it was. So it hasn't lost any temperature, hasn't lost any heat by opening the lid. That's 60, so maybe in an hour's time that'll go up to 65 again. And what I do on this bin, I've got wooden slats on the front, drilled a couple of holes in there, I think they're 8mm holes, and then a compost probe can push in, so you get a reading 500mm into the heap. That one's about 6 inches from the top. I've got another one halfway, which is a sort of core of heap, And then this gives you a good indication of how well aerated, how well turned the bin is, because there's one near the base as well. This is a foot up from the base. And if that's hot, it's actually quite compacted there. It's hard to get the probe in. Yeah, so that one's already 50. Yeah, that one's about 50. This one's down to about 40. And then I'll add the other material, put the cover on top. And what I tend to do with these as well, I've got these empty plastic sacks, just put those roughly over the top, retain any moisture. Any moisture that evaporates will condense on those and then drain back into the heap to maintain that moisture level. Without that, you're going to kind of get a lot of water vapour, and then you're going to have to keep drying the heap again, or wetting the heap again rather. So the top is just bits of old decking boards, and then I've got polystyrene sheet from a skip. So that's 160 millimeters depth, and then on the front half I've got yeah, around about 150, 160 millimeters as well. So that's Cellutex insulation. That's slightly better quality insulation than the expanded polystyrene. But there you go. I'll post this on the site, and then I'll just do another couple of recordings with the temperature once it's levelled out a bit more. Yeah, so spent grain, really good stuff. Wood shavings, if you can get it for free. If you know it's just from hardwoods to softwoods, don't use anything that's had any plywood or MDF, because you're going to have formaldehyde resin and kind of latex glues and just PVAs and things like that. So you're going to have kind of plastic adhesive, some water soluble, but there'll be quite a high percentage as well. Wood shavings is fantastic if you can get wood chip. I mean, this is really nice stuff. It is very fine as well. There are, as I said before, there's only some slightly larger chips, but I mean, these little bits, once that's been composted for a few months, the worms will just consume that. I always notice with wood lice as well, different levels of moisture in a worm bin. The top surface always seems to be slightly dry, so you'll get loads and loads of wood lice, or pill bugs, or roly-polies as they're sometimes called. And there's loads of leaves in this as well. So I'd say that was probably quite a good mix of greens and the browns that would compost quite well on its own. So where I'm mixing these materials with the wood shavings and spent grain is around about 50-50 carbons to nitrogen. Then this is around about 50-50 already. So yeah, even though you're putting a lot of wood chip and a lot of sawdust in there, it's still quite a nice mix. It's getting dark now, so I think it's time to wind up the video.